Hello, I'm the Daily Storyteller, and I'm here to keep you company today. If you've visited my channel before, welcome back. And if this is your first time, I'm so glad to welcome you to the world of stories. I know many of you use these videos to relax or to help fall asleep more easily. So get comfortable, let your body relax, and allow the gentle sound of rain in the background to wash away your stress and worries. In this video, you'll hear chilling stories, most of them based on true events, told with honesty and depth. If you enjoy this content, please like the video and subscribe to my channel. Now then, let's begin. It all began with a phone call in the dead of night, dragging me out of a restless sleep. The voice on the other end was faint, breathy, almost as if it were choking on its own words, struggling to convey a warning. Run, before it's too late. Its heart has never stopped beating. I couldn't make sense of it, but the cold weight in the voice sent chills through me. For the first time in my life, I felt an unsettling pull towards something I couldn't explain. And it all started with the story of the old asylum, a place abandoned for over 50 years, but still haunting the minds of those who sought the truth. The asylum was unlike any other place. In its final days of operation, it housed the most severe mental disorders, a place where no one left without carrying a piece of darkness within them. Patients lived in dim rooms where the walls whispered of tortured souls never freed. Rumor had it that a group of doctors and nurses had conducted secret experiments leading to strange, unexplained deaths. The last patients of the asylum, those who could no longer defend themselves, were left to wither in dark rooms, their lives snuffed out. I couldn't fully believe the stories, but the curiosity gnawed at me. I decided to investigate. Along with a few friends, we planned a trip to explore the forgotten asylum, a place where no one dared to tread. What I didn't know was whether I was stepping into the truth or making a fatal mistake. The asylum stood imposingly in the moonlight, its broken windows like lifeless eyes staring out into the dark. The once sturdy structure now leaned as if its very foundation was slowly sinking into the earth, and vines snaked up the crumbling walls like skeletal hands grasping at the air. The air was thick, heavy with the whispers of the past. As we made our way inside, the air grew colder with each step, the sound of our footfalls muffled by the thick layers of dust. The smell of mildew was thick, and every corner seemed to breathe with the weight of forgotten stories. The walls, once white and sterile, were now streaked with dirt, as if the building itself was suffocating beneath the weight of its own history. I looked around, my flashlight cutting through the darkness like a blade, revealing rooms filled with old furniture, rusted medical equipment, and faded photographs on the walls. The atmosphere was suffocating, as though the very air was thick with the sadness and pain that had been left behind. The deeper we ventured into the asylum, the more it felt like the building itself was alive, watching us. There were rooms that felt impossibly cold, as if they were not just abandoned, but actively holding on to the memories of those who had suffered here. I began to feel as though something unseen was following us, just beyond the reach of my flashlight. As we entered the basement, I felt a sudden shift in the air, a heaviness that pressed down on my chest. The walls seemed to close in, and the faint sound of whispering echoed in the distance. The whispers were indistinct at first, like the murmurs of a far-off conversation, but soon they grew louder, clearer, and more urgent. It was as though the walls themselves were speaking to us. One of my friends, Mark, froze in place, his eyes wide with fear.
"Did you hear that?"
he whispered. His voice trembled as he pointed toward the far end of the hallway.
"There's someone down there."
I followed his gaze but saw nothing. Just shadows and old wooden doors that had long since been forgotten. I shook my head, trying to dismiss the creeping anxiety that was slowly taking hold of me. But then I heard it too. A faint scratching sound, like nails dragging across the floor, followed by a soft whimper, like someone, or something, was trapped. I took a deep breath and motioned for my friends to stay close. Let's just keep moving. We're here to get answers, right? We moved deeper into the asylum's heart, passing through corridors that seemed to stretch endlessly. The whispers followed us, growing louder and more persistent. It felt as if the asylum was trying to pull us into its grasp, like it wanted us to become a part of its dark history. As we rounded a corner, I saw it. A door at the end of the hallway cracked open just enough to reveal a sliver of light spilling from within. Without thinking, I pushed the door open, my heart pounding in my chest. Inside, the room was empty, save for a single old chair in the center. But as I stepped forward, the door slammed shut behind me with a deafening bang. I spun around, my pulse racing, but the room was still empty. Yet the whispers were louder now, almost as if they were directly in my ear. Leave, leave before it finds you. The words were clearer now, spoken in a voice that was both familiar and foreign at the same time. I turned toward my friends, only to find them gone. Panic surged in my chest as I called out for them, but the only response was the sound of my own voice echoing in the empty hallway. Mark. Sarah? Jake? No answer. I felt a cold sweat trickle down my back as I backed away from the chair, my heart racing. Something was terribly wrong. I needed to get out of here, but the asylum's walls seemed to have shifted, blocking my way. A figure emerged from the shadows. It was a woman dressed in an old nurse's uniform, her face obscured by long, matted hair. Her eyes were hollow, dark pits of despair, and her outstretched hand trembled as she reached toward me. The woman's hand reached out, trembling, as though beckoning me closer. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. Her hollow eyes locked onto mine, and I felt a strange chill run down my spine, as if the temperature in the room had dropped several degrees in an instant. Leave. Now. Her voice was a dry whisper, like the sound of 1,000 whispers, all rolled into one, echoing with a sorrowful and terrifying urgency. I took a step back, my heart hammering in my chest, but the walls of the asylum, which had already seemed to close in around me, now felt like a tightening noose. The air felt thick, oppressive, as if I were suffocating. My legs trembled, but my feet seemed glued to the floor. Who are you? I managed to choke out, my voice barely more than a hoarse whisper. The woman didn't answer immediately. Instead, her head tilted to the side in a disturbingly unnatural way, her matted hair falling to cover her face. The light flickered above me, casting long, jagged shadows on the walls, as if the building itself were alive and restless. Then she spoke again, her voice a low, raspy murmur. I am one of them, one of the lost, one of the forgotten. Suddenly the room felt colder still. A gust of wind, cold and bitter, blew through the cracked windows, and I heard the unmistakable sound of shuffling footsteps behind me. I spun around, heart pounding in my chest, but saw nothing. The woman stepped closer, her feet gliding over the floor in a way that defied the laws of physics, her movements too fluid, too unnatural. The darkness seemed to swirl around her as if she were a shadow come to life.
The asylum never forgets, she whispered. Neither do we.
Her eyes, dark as pitch, locked onto mine once again. You're here because you were meant to be. You were chosen to remember what they want to erase. You must never leave. I opened my mouth to respond, but no words came. The oppressive weight of the building, the darkness pressing against my chest, made it impossible to think clearly. The whispers grew louder, filling my mind with a constant, maddening hum. The woman's voice was a distant echo now, as if coming from a far-off place. They were all lost here. They were all forgotten. The patients, the doctors, even the ones who thought they had escaped. Before I could comprehend what she meant, the floor beneath me groaned and I stumbled back. The lights flickered violently before plunging the room into total darkness. I tried to steady myself, my hands outstretched in front of me, but I could feel the cold, the deep, suffocating cold seeping into my very bones. Then I heard it, a low, guttural growl coming from deep within the building. It was so close I could feel the vibrations in the air around me. Something was in here with me, something large, something ancient. I instinctively reached for the flashlight at my side, flicking it on. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing the same long hallway I had come from. But something was wrong. The hallway was longer than I remembered, stretching impossibly far. The walls seemed to pulse, breathing with an unnatural rhythm. I turned around, but the woman was gone. I began to run, my footsteps echoing in the eerie silence, but the hallway seemed endless. No matter how far I ran, the exit never appeared. My heart raced as I pushed myself harder, but every turn I made only led me deeper into the labyrinthine asylum. And then I saw it. In the distance, a flickering light, a door slightly ajar, glowing with a soft, inviting light. I felt a strange pull toward it, as though it were calling me. My instincts screamed at me to turn back, but I couldn't resist. I needed to know what was on the other side. As I approached the door, the whispers grew louder, swirling around me like a storm of voices. Some were frantic, some were calm, but all of them seemed to be saying the same thing. "Come closer. It's time." I hesitated for a moment before reaching out and pushing the door open. The room beyond was dimly lit, and it smelled faintly of decay. The walls were lined with faded photographs of the asylum's early years, some of them cracked and stained with age. The room felt like a memory trapped in time. Then I saw it. A large wooden table stood in the center of the room. It was covered in yellowed paper, old medical records and journals, all of them hastily written in ink that had long since faded. There, in the center, was a single object, a small, ornate box, intricately carved and adorned with strange symbols that I couldn't recognize. I moved toward it, my hands trembling as I reached out to touch it. As soon as my fingers made contact with the box, a shock ran through me, a cold surge that jolted my entire body. Suddenly the room felt alive, pulsing with energy. The whispers reached a fever pitch, echoing in my ears, until I thought my head might explode. Then I heard it, a voice, low and deep, coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. "You shouldn't have opened it. It had been a month since my grandfather passed away. The small, quaint town of Hallowbrook, nestled between towering mountains, felt emptier, quieter, without his presence. I hadn't planned on returning to the town for his funeral, but something kept pulling me back. A memory, a feeling that never quite left me, even as a child. Hallowbrook was a town with secrets, and I was about to uncover one that would change everything I thought I knew about my family, the town, and my own sanity. I remember the lake. I could still hear my grandfather's voice, the way he warned me never to go near it. He would always say, The lake watches, child. Don't tempt what lies beneath. As a child, I never understood. It was just a lake. A beautiful, serene body of water surrounded by trees and mountains. Nothing more, nothing less. But now, after everything I had experienced in the past few weeks, I began to wonder if there was something more to his words. The day I arrived in Hallowbrook, I made my way to the lake. The air was thick with the scent of pine and wet earth. The trees swayed gently in the breeze, and the water shimmered under the pale afternoon sun. It looked peaceful, too peaceful. I couldn't resist the urge to get closer, to understand why my grandfather had warned me for so long. I stood at the edge of the lake, the water dark and still, reflecting the sky like a mirror. But then a strange feeling settled in my stomach, a cold, heavy sensation, as if the water itself was staring back at me, waiting. I knelt down, dipping my fingers into the cool water. The moment my skin touched the surface, I felt it, a pulse, a deep, rhythmic thrum, almost like a heartbeat. My heart skipped a beat, and I pulled my hand back, eyes wide with confusion. I scanned the water for any sign of movement. Nothing. Yet the pulse persisted, echoing in my chest, syncing with my own heartbeat. I felt like I was being drawn into the lake, as if the water was calling me. Something ancient, something malevolent was waiting just below the surface.
"Grandfather,"
I whispered as the memories flooded back. As a child, I'd often ask him about the lake, but he would just shake his head, his eyes clouded with fear. "Some things are better left unknown," he would say. There are things in this world and in this lake that should never be disturbed. I had never understood why he never elaborated, but standing at the water's edge now, I knew there was more to the lake than I had ever realized. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The entire town seemed to hold its breath, waiting for something to happen. I stayed in my grandfather's old house, a dilapidated cottage on the outskirts of town. It was as if time had stopped when he passed, leaving the house frozen in time. I sat by the window, looking out at the lake. The moon hung low in the sky, casting an eerie glow over the water. For a moment, the lake seemed to move. It was subtle, but unmistakable. The water rippled in slow, unnatural waves. My breath caught in my throat as I watched in silence, knowing that whatever it wasn't just the wind. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. The strange pulsing from the lake haunted me. It felt like something was waiting, something ancient and hungry. The next morning I went to town to gather more information, hoping to find answers. The local bookstore, an old building covered in ivy, was run by Mrs. Carter, a woman who had lived in Hallowbrook for as long as I could remember. She knew everything about everyone. If there was anyone who could tell me more about the lake, it was her. "Ah, the lake," she said, her eyes narrowing as I asked her about it. "There are stories, old stories that have been passed down, but nobody talks about them much anymore. People forget, or they choose not to remember." She paused, as if weighing something in her mind. "It's said that the lake holds something that has been there for centuries. A creature, some call it. Others call it a curse. No one knows for sure. But I'll tell you this. Every generation has its share of disappearances. People who go missing, never to be seen again. You're not the first to feel drawn to it. The lake has a way of pulling people in." Her words sent a chill down my spine. It wasn't just superstition. There was something real about the fear in her voice. People had vanished, and I was standing at the edge of something that had been waiting for centuries. "Why did my grandfather warn me so many times?" I asked, my voice shaky. Mrs. Carter lowered her voice. Your grandfather knew. He had seen it in his youth. He wasn't just telling stories. The lake, it has a history, a dark history. I asked her to elaborate, but she shook her head. Some things are better left unsaid, she replied. Just remember, the lake never forgets, and neither will the creature. I left the bookstore with more questions than answers, but one thing was clear. The lake had its secrets, and they weren't ready to be uncovered. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, I returned to the lake. I needed to know. I needed to face whatever had been haunting my family for generations. I stood once again at the water's edge, the stillness surrounding me like a blanket. The surface was calm, too calm, and then I saw it. A shadow. At first it was subtle, like a small movement beneath the water. But then it grew, the shape of something massive, something ancient, stirring beneath the surface. I could feel it, the presence of the creature, the thing that had haunted this town for centuries. It wasn't just a story. It wasn't just a warning. It was real. The shadow beneath the lake stirred again, this time more violently, sending ripples across the water. My breath caught in my chest, and I stumbled back. The sensation of being watched returned with a fierce intensity, almost like the lake itself was reaching out for me, drawing me closer with an invisible force. The eerie pulsing, which I had felt earlier, grew louder now, vibrating through the ground beneath my feet. It felt like the heartbeat of something immense, something ancient, rising from the depths. I stood frozen, paralyzed with a mixture of terror and fascination. I knew what I was seeing wasn't natural, but the strange pull of the water kept me rooted to the spot. I could feel my heartbeat racing in my chest, matching the rhythm of whatever lay beneath the surface. Then I saw it, a massive shape, rising slowly from the depths, its dark form breaking through the water's surface with a sound like grinding stone. The water around it seemed to boil and churn as the creature emerged, its form twisting and stretching like something out of a nightmare. Its body was long and serpentine, with scales that shimmered in the pale moonlight. But what caught my attention the most were its eyes, two dark, hollow orbs staring straight at me with a malevolent intelligence. It was the creature my grandfather had warned me about. The one that had haunted his dreams, and now mine. The thing that had existed in the shadows for generations. I felt my knees go weak. My mind screamed at me to run, to flee from the water's edge, but my legs wouldn't obey. I was rooted to the spot, unable to tear my gaze away from the creature that rose slowly from the lake, its immense size dwarfing everything around it. The water splashed around it as it slid closer, and I realized with a sickening jolt that it was coming toward me. Suddenly, a loud crack echoed through the air. I turned sharply and saw a figure running toward me, cutting through the trees. It was Sarah, one of the friends I had come back to Hallowbrook with. She had come to find me after I had disappeared for hours, but as soon as she saw the creature, her face turned pale, her body stiffening in fear. "Get back!" she screamed, her voice trembling. "What are you doing here? You don't understand." I wanted to yell back, to warn her, but my voice caught in my throat. The creature was closer now, its eyes narrowing as it focused on Sarah. She backed away slowly, fear evident in every movement, but it was too late. The creature was already upon us. The water surged violently as it lunged toward her. It moved with an unnatural speed, its long, twisted body coiling like a snake. Sarah screamed, falling to the ground as the creature's tendrils shot out of the water, wrapping around her legs. I couldn't breathe. My mind screamed at me to do something, anything, but I was frozen, unable to move, unable to act. "Sarah!" I finally managed to scream, my voice raw with fear. I lunged forward, reaching out to grab her, but the creature's grip tightened. It dragged her toward the water, its monstrous form rising out of the lake as it pulled her closer, dragging her into the depths. But just before she vanished into the water, her eyes met mine. There was no fear in them anymore, just a strange, resigned calm, as if she had accepted her fate long before. And then she was gone. I stood there in a state of shock, the scream still echoing in my mind. The creature, now satisfied with its catch, began to retreat back into the lake, its massive body disappearing beneath the surface, leaving only ripples in its wake. The water settled and the eerie calm returned, as if nothing had ever happened. My heart was racing, my body trembling uncontrollably. I stumbled back, my head spinning. What had I just witnessed? Was it even real, or had it all been a hallucination? But then I felt it again. The pull, the deep, resonating pulse beneath the surface of the water. I looked down at the lake and saw a strange shape floating just beneath the surface. Sarah's face, pale and lifeless, staring up at me with those same hollow eyes. She had become one with the creature, part of the curse that had claimed so many before her. I couldn't escape it. The lake was a part of me now, and it had taken Sarah as it had taken so many before. There was no escaping the pull, the curse that bound this place to something ancient, something beyond human understanding. I ran back to the old house, not daring to look back. My legs burned with each step, but I couldn't stop. I had to get away. I had to get away from the lake, from the creature that had waited for generations to claim its next victim. But as I neared the house, I saw something that made my blood run cold. The front door, which I had left locked, was wide open. My heart skipped a beat. No one else was supposed to be here. The house was supposed to be empty, but someone had been inside. I slowly stepped forward, my breath shallow, my senses heightened. The door creaked as I pushed it open, the air inside heavy with the smell of decay. It was dark, but I could make out faint shapes moving within. I froze. A figure emerged from the shadows. It was Sarah. But not the Sarah I had known. Her face was twisted, her eyes dark and hollow, just like the creature's. She smiled at me, but it wasn't her smile. It was something else, something that shouldn't exist in this world.
"Why did you leave me?"
she whispered, her voice eerily calm.
"You were supposed to stay."
You were supposed to remember. I backed away, panic rising in my chest. What are you? What happened to you? Sarah's twisted form took a step forward, her body moving with unnatural fluidity.
"I am the lake now,"
she said softly, her voice a hollow echo.
"I was chosen."
And now so are you. In the small town of Ravenswood, where fog clung to the streets like a shroud and ancient oak trees whispered secrets to the wind, there was an old house no one dared enter. Its paint was peeling, windows boarded up, and a twisted iron gate guarded the entrance like a sentinel. This was the home of the legendary doll maker, a man whose creations were said to be more than mere toys. As a child, I had heard the stories whispered at night, children who disappeared, only to be found later clutching a doll with glassy eyes that seemed to follow you everywhere. They said the doll maker's attic was a chamber of horrors where lifeless eyes watched from every corner, and every doll held a secret too terrible to tell. I never believed the stories. Dolls were just dolls, right? But when I inherited the doll maker's house from a distant relative I had never met, everything changed. The day I stepped into that creaking, dust-laden house, the air felt thick with unease. The faint scent of old wood, candle wax, and something else, something metallic and cold, clung to the walls. Shadows flickered in the corners as the wind moaned through broken panes. The attic beckoned. It was locked tight, the only place in the house I hadn't dared explore. But that night, as rain tapped softly against the roof, I found the key tucked beneath a loose floorboard in the parlor. My heart pounded as I ascended the narrow staircase, each step creaking beneath me. The attic door groaned open, revealing a room bathed in moonlight filtering through grimy windows. The walls were lined with shelves, dozens upon dozens of dolls, each meticulously crafted, their glass eyes reflecting the dim light like tiny, watchful stars. At the center was a workbench cluttered with tools, scraps of porcelain, and paint pots. The remnants of a twisted genius's obsession. I felt a shiver ripple down my spine. These dolls weren't ordinary. Some seemed too lifelike, their delicate hands frozen in mid-motion, their eyes slightly too expressive, as if they held memories not meant for the living. As I stepped closer, one doll caught my eye. A porcelain girl dressed in a faded blue gown, her eyes a deep, unnatural shade of emerald. She seemed to watch me, following my every move. I reached out, trembling, and as my fingers brushed her cheek, a cold chill surged through my arm. Suddenly, the attic grew colder, and the faint sound of whispering filled the air, soft, indistinct, but unmistakably there. I turned, but the attic was empty, save for the dolls. The whispering grew louder, more urgent, until it became a chorus of pleading voices. "Help us!" Frozen in fear, I dropped the doll. The sound echoed like a scream through the attic. The other doll's eyes seemed to glisten with unshed tears. I backed away, my heart pounding wildly. From the shadows, a figure stepped forward, an old man, gaunt and pale, his eyes gleaming with madness. It was the doll maker, or at least his spirit. "I crafted them. I gave them life," he whispered, voice barely audible over the storm outside. "Souls trapped, bound, cursed." He gestured toward the dolls. Each one was a child, stolen from this world, preserved in porcelain and paint. The air grew thick with despair as the truth settled over me like a suffocating veil. These were no ordinary dolls. They were vessels, prisons for the lost souls of children, captured by the doll-maker's twisted craft. "I sought to save them," the spirit said, a desperate madness in his eyes. "But the curse, it twisted my work into a nightmare." I wanted to run, to escape this place, but the attic door slammed shut behind me with a force that shook the walls. The dolls seemed to move, their glass eyes glowing faintly in the dark. I was trapped, and the voices of the lost children were growing louder. The attic plunged into darkness as the storm outside intensified. Lightning flashed, casting jagged shadows across the countless dolls that lined the shelves, their glass eyes gleaming with unnatural light. The whispering voices swelled into a haunting chorus, pleading, sorrowful, desperate. I tried the attic door again, but it was sealed tight, as if the house itself refused to let me go. The doll-maker's spirit remained, his gaunt figure drifting closer, his eyes burning with a sorrowful fire. "You must listen," he urged. voice trembling with anguish. The curse can be broken, but it demands a price. My skin prickled with cold dread. What price? I whispered. The souls trapped within these dolls, he said, gesturing to the silent figures surrounding us. They seek release, but freeing them means risking everything. The curse feeds on despair, and once freed, it will hunt the living. A cold wind swept through the attic, carrying the faint scent of decay and lost innocence. The dolls began to shift, not physically, but the very air around them seemed to pulse with restless energy. Eyes glinted, tiny hands twitched, and a few faces seemed to contort in silent screams. Summoning every ounce of courage, I asked, "How do I break the curse?" The doll-maker's ghost lowered his head, the shadows deepening his gaunt features. "There is a ritual," he said, "an ancient rite lost to time, but buried within my journals. You must find the master journal hidden deep beneath this house, in the cellar. But beware, the house is alive with its own will, and it will resist your every move." He raised a pale, trembling hand, pointing toward a narrow staircase leading downward, dark, steep, and swallowed by shadows. "I must go," I said, fear twisting my stomach into knots. Yet the voices, the children's cries, compelled me forward. The attic door suddenly creaked and slowly swung open, as if granting permission. I swallowed my fear and stepped toward the staircase, the whispers following me like a cold breath on my neck. The cellar was cold, damp, and suffocating. The walls dripped with moisture, and the air was thick with the scent of mold and forgotten things. As I descended, the faint glow of candlelight flickered in the distance. I found the master journal lying atop a dusty wooden table, its leather cover cracked and worn. Opening it, I discovered pages filled with faded ink, cryptic symbols, and frantic notes. A desperate man's attempt to undo the nightmare he had created. The ritual involved gathering relics scattered across the house, a broken music box, a cracked mirror, and a single black rose preserved in glass. Only when combined and invoked under the blood moon could the souls be freed. Suddenly, a chilling voice echoed through the cellar. "You cannot escape." From the shadows, dark tendrils surged forward, the house itself responding to my intrusion. Cold hands gripped my arms, trying to pull me into the darkness. Panic surged, but I forced myself to focus, clutching the journal tightly. I sprinted back toward the attic, relics in hand, the house groaning and shaking as if enraged. The doll's eyes glowed brighter now, and faint laughter echoed, a maddening, childlike cackle that sent shivers down my spine. At the center of the attic, I set the relics carefully, arranging them as per the ritual's instructions. The black rose shimmered under the moonlight. The cracked mirror reflected shards of my own terrified face, and the broken music box sat silent but ominous. I whispered the ancient incantation from the journal, my voice shaking but determined. The air thickened, the whispers exploded into screams. The dolls convulsed violently, porcelain cracking and splintering, releasing bursts of shadowy smoke. The spirits of the lost children emerged, pale, ethereal figures reaching out with mournful eyes. A final surge of energy flooded the room, and then silence. The dolls lay shattered, the attic still and empty. The weight lifted. The oppressive cold vanished. But as I turned to leave, I caught sight of one doll still intact on the floor. The porcelain girl in the faded blue gown, her emerald eyes shining brighter than before. The doll-maker's voice whispered in my ear, "The curse never truly dies." Blackwood Forest had always been a place of dread and mystery, whispered about in hushed tones by locals and travelers alike. They said the trees themselves were alive, watching, waiting. Children vanished, strange lights flickered through the mist, and an eerie silence followed those who dared enter after sunset. I was drawn there not by superstition, but by desperation. My sister, Lily, had disappeared 3 weeks ago while hiking near the forest's edge. The police had searched tirelessly, but no trace was found. The town's old legends spoke of a curse that claimed the souls of the unwary, trapping them in a liminal space between worlds, a place called the Hollow. Determined to find her, I prepared myself to enter Blackwood Forest. The air was thick with dampness and decay as I stepped beneath the ancient canopy. Fog clung to the undergrowth, swallowing the path behind me. Every step was muffled by a carpet of fallen leaves, yet I felt the forest's breath on my neck, alive, watchful. As daylight waned, shadows deepened and twisted. The trees seemed to close ranks, forming a labyrinth of gnarled branches and dark trunks. My heart pounded with each step, the silence broken only by the crunch of my boots and the occasional distant whisper that seemed to come from nowhere. Suddenly, I saw it. A flicker of movement, a pale figure between the trees. I called out, "Lily?" But the figure vanished like smoke. Only the echo of my voice remained. Night fell quickly, and with it came a cold that seeped into my bones. I found a clearing where moonlight spilled through the branches, illuminating an ancient stone altar, cracked and covered in moss. Etched into its surface were symbols, strange, twisting runes pulsing faintly with a blue glow. As I approached, I felt the unmistakable presence of something watching, waiting. A whisper drifted on the wind, unintelligible yet full of sorrow and warning. "Leave before it's too late." But I couldn't leave, not without her. Suddenly the ground trembled. From the shadows emerged twisted shapes, shadows given form, eyes glowing with malevolence. They circled the altar, their voices rising in a chant that chilled me to the core. I realized then that the Hollow was no mere legend. It was a prison, a gateway, and a trap. As the creatures closed in, the runes flared bright, and the forest itself seemed to come alive. The earth beneath me cracked open, and a cold hand reached out from the darkness. I had stepped into the heart of Blackwood's curse, and now there was no turning back. The cold hand that had risen from the cracked earth gripped my ankle with a strength that seemed unnatural. I screamed, struggling to free myself, but the forest's grasp was relentless. The shadows encircled me, their glowing eyes fixated on my every move. The ancient runes on the stone altar pulsed with an otherworldly light, casting eerie reflections that danced on the twisted branches. I felt the air grow heavy, suffused with a sinister energy that clawed at my mind, whispering forgotten truths and dark promises. Then a voice, clearer than the rest, cut through the chaos. It was Lily's voice. "Help me, please." Desperation fueled me. Ignoring the burning cold and the tightening grip, I reached down toward the outstretched hand. Our fingers met, and a jolt shot through me, a surge of memories and emotions not my own, visions of the Hollow's prisoners, trapped souls bound to the forest's curse. I realized Lily was caught between worlds, imprisoned in this spectral limbo. To save her, I would have to confront the source of the curse, the dark heart of Blackwood Forest itself. With renewed resolve, I pulled myself free and stood. The shadowy figures recoiled but did not disappear. The forest whispered warnings, but I moved forward, guided by Lily's voice, deeper into the darkness. I navigated through the maze of trees, the whispers growing louder, echoing around me like a chorus of lost souls. At last, I came upon a cavernous hollow surrounded by ancient oaks, their twisted roots coiling like serpents. At its center stood a towering figure cloaked in shadows, a guardian of the curse. Its eyes burned with an icy fire as it spoke, voice like cracking ice. Why do you seek to undo what has been bound for centuries? The hollow is eternal. Those who enter become part of it. I seek my sister, I declared, voice steady despite the fear. I will not leave without her. The guardian's lips curled into a cruel smile. Then face the curse and be claimed like all before you. The ground shook violently as the guardian raised its hands, summoning the hollow's dark power. Shadows surged forth, enveloping the clearing in darkness. I felt the weight of centuries pressing down on me, threatening to crush my spirit. But from within the darkness, a soft light emerged. Lily's form, pale but resolute. She reached out, her hand glowing with an ethereal warmth that cut through the shadow. Together, we faced the guardian. With the strength of our bond and the light of hope, we challenged the darkness. The hollow shrieked in fury as the ancient curse began to unravel. As dawn broke over Blackwood Forest, the shadows receded, the whispers silenced. The curse had been broken, and the lost souls were freed. Lily and I emerged from the hollow, forever changed but alive. The forest stood silent, a place no longer of fear but of remembrance, of the power of love to defy even the darkest curses. There's something hauntingly hypnotic about trains at midnight. The rhythmic clatter of wheels on tracks, the flickering shadows cast by passing trees, and the distant whistle that seems to carry forgotten memories. For most, it's just a ride, a passage from one place to another. But for me, that midnight train was the beginning of a journey into a nightmare I could never escape. It started on a rainy evening, the kind where the world seems to blur and blend into itself. I had missed my usual bus and decided to take the last train heading north. The station was nearly deserted, save for a handful of travelers huddled beneath flickering lamps, faces pale and eyes tired. I boarded the train and found a solitary seat by the window. The car was old, its interior worn and smelling faintly of dust and old leather. As the train pulled away, the city's lights faded into darkness, replaced by the deep shadows of the countryside. At first, the ride was uneventful. The steady rocking of the carriage and the muted conversations of distant passengers lulled me into a drowsy state. But as the train chugged deeper into the night, the atmosphere shifted. The lights flickered. The whispers began. It started as a faint murmur, barely audible beneath the hum of the engine. Then voices, indistinct, urgent, sorrowful, seemed to seep through the walls. Passengers glanced nervously at one another, clutching their belongings tighter. I tried to ignore it, focusing instead on the rain streaking down the window. But then the whispers grew louder, forming words I couldn't understand, but that chilled me to my core. Suddenly the train jerked violently, throwing me from my seat. The lights went out completely, plunging the car into darkness. When the lights flickered back on, the carriage had changed. The windows no longer showed the passing countryside, but a bleak, fog-shrouded landscape. The other passengers had vanished, replaced by shadowy figures with hollow eyes, silent and motionless. Panic surged through me. I tried to open the door, but it was locked. The train was moving, but I had no idea where. A cold breath brushed my neck, and I turned to see a figure cloaked in tattered robes, its face obscured beneath a dark hood. It raised a bony hand, pointing forward. "You cannot escape the midnight train," it whispered, voice like rustling leaves. "All aboard are passengers of fate." The figure's words hung in the stale air, chilling me to the bone. I tried again to open the locked door, but my hands passed through it like smoke, an illusion, a barrier woven from some dark magic. The train car seemed to pulse with a malevolent life of its own, the flickering lights casting long shadows that writhed like serpents. I sank back into my seat, heart hammering as the doors hissed shut and the train lurched forward into an unearthly night. Outside the windows, the fog thickened, swallowing everything whole until only a suffocating grey remained. Whispers swirled around me, echoing with despair and longing. Faces appeared in the mist, ghostly figures trapped in endless loops of sorrow. I recognized some. Lost souls, victims of tragedies past, forever doomed to ride this spectral train between worlds. The hooded figure returned, now sitting across from me, its hollow eyes reflecting the void. "You sought passage north," it murmured, "but here, north is nowhere. This train carries souls lost in time, caught between life and death." I shivered. "How do I get off?" The figure's gaze pierced me. "Only when you confront your own shadow can the journey end." Suddenly the train shifted. The walls melted away, revealing a twisted carnival of memories. Scenes from my past paraded before me in grotesque detail. Faces of loved ones, moments of joy and regret, all distorted into haunting caricatures. I was forced to relive every mistake, every loss. The weight of guilt crushed me. Yet in this darkness, a flicker of resolve ignited. I stood and faced the apparition, blocking the way to the train's exit. A monstrous shadow of myself, snarling and clawing, embodying my deepest fears and regrets. The battle was silent but fierce. Every strike, every parry was a struggle against my own demons. I felt the shadow's claws tearing at my soul, but I fought back with every shred of will. Finally, with a cry of defiance, I shattered the shadow into shards of light. The oppressive fog lifted, and the train slowed, its grim carriage dissolving into the dawn's first light. The doors slid open, and I stepped out onto a platform bathed in golden sunrise. Home. The midnight train was gone, but the echoes of that night lingered. I was changed, haunted, yet free. Some journeys never truly end. They live on in the shadows of our minds, reminding us of the darkness we conquered and the light we carry within. The old Blackmore Asylum stood abandoned on the outskirts of town, its crumbling walls swallowed by tangled vines and shadows. Once a place of healing, it had become a place of whispered horrors, a monument to forgotten suffering and unspeakable secrets. I had always been fascinated by the asylum's dark history, drawn by tales of tortured souls and eerie voices carried on the wind. When the opportunity arose to explore its decaying halls, I didn't hesitate. The heavy iron gates creaked open with a groan, revealing a courtyard blanketed in mist. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of mildew and rust. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the distant drip of water echoing through the empty corridors. Flashlight in hand, I stepped inside, the beam cutting through the darkness, to reveal peeling paint, broken furniture, and graffiti scrawled by forgotten trespassers. Every step stirred the ghosts of the past, and I could almost hear the faint murmurs of patients long gone. I made my way to the East Wing, where the most notorious treatments had taken place. The walls were lined with faded photographs, haunting images of eyes staring from the past, trapped forever in time. Suddenly the beam flickered and died. The darkness closed in. My breath hitched. Then a voice, soft, distant and desperate, whispered, "Help me." I spun around, shining the light toward the source, but saw only empty hallways. The voice grew louder, echoing through the asylum's labyrinthine passages. Driven by a mixture of fear and curiosity, I followed the voice to a rusted door marked Isolation Ward. The lock was broken, the door hanging ajar as if inviting me in. Inside, the room was freezing cold, and the walls seemed to pulse with a hidden life. A faint glow emanated from the far corner, where an old patient's journal lay open on a decaying bed. The pages told a chilling tale of a patient named Evelyn, a young woman who had vanished without a trace, her screams swallowed by the asylum's dark heart. As I read, the whispers became frantic, the air thick with tension. Suddenly the journal slammed shut. The temperature plummeted and shadows coalesced into a figure, a pale woman with hollow eyes and tattered clothes. She reached out, her voice a mournful wail. "Find the truth! Free me!" The asylum had awakened, and the echoes of its forgotten past demanded justice. The ghostly figure of Evelyn hovered just beyond reach, her hollow eyes pleading for release. As her cold fingers brushed my arm, a sudden wave of despair washed over me. I was no longer just an observer. I was a vessel for her suffering and the suffering of countless others trapped within the asylum's walls. Visions flooded my mind, dimly lit rooms where patients screamed silently, locked in cells where time lost meaning, and doctors whose faces were masked not just by cloth, but by a twisted obsession with control. Evelyn's anguish was palpable, her story one of betrayal and abandonment. "You must find the truth hidden beneath the asylum," she urged, voice breaking like a fragile thread. "Only then can we rest." I plunged deeper into the asylum's labyrinthine corridors, each step echoing with faint whispers and creaks that sounded almost alive. The peeling wallpaper seemed to bleed memories. The very floorboards moaned under the weight of the past. Shadows stretched unnaturally, twisting into faces that vanished the moment I tried to focus. Reaching the basement was like descending into the earth's dark heart. The air turned thick with mold and decay, pressing down on me like an unseen force. I lit my flashlight with trembling hands, its beam cutting through a haze of dust and cobwebs. Near a crumbling wall, a rusted metal box lay half buried under broken bricks. The ornate insignia on its lid hinted at secrets long buried. With effort, I pried it open and revealed a fragile, leather-bound diary, its pages brittle, yet its words screaming across time. The diary was Evelyn's voice from beyond the grave. Her handwriting, shaky but determined, chronicled a tale far worse than I had imagined. Patients had been subjected to experimental treatments, electroshock devices wielded without mercy, chemical substances injected without consent, and cruel isolation that shattered minds. Worse still, the asylum's leadership had hidden these atrocities from the world. Names were changed, records destroyed. The community was fed sanitized versions of events, while the true horror remained locked behind these walls. Evelyn's last entries spoke of her desperate plan to escape and expose the truth. But before she could act, she was silenced, her fate sealed in darkness. A sudden chill swept the room, and Evelyn's apparition reappeared, sorrow etched deep into her features. "You have found the truth. Now you must share it. Only then can the chains be broken." Her plea echoed in my heart. I understood now. The spirits were bound not just by death, but by the weight of forgotten stories and lies. Gathering the diary, I retraced my steps through the basement's cold corridors. With every word I read, the oppressive gloom lightened, replaced by a fragile hope. Evelyn's form faded gently, a peaceful smile touching her lips for the first time in decades. Emerging from the asylum into the dawn's first light, the building no longer loomed as a prison, but stood as a silent witness to truths long hidden. The air was clearer, the shadows less menacing. I knew revealing Blackmore's horrors would shake the town, face opposition, and dredge up painful memories. But I was resolved, for Evelyn. For the forgotten, for those who had suffered in silence, their voices would finally be heard. Seabridge Cove was a place where time seemed to hang heavy, like the dense fog that rolled in from the ocean. The lighthouse there had stood steadfast for over 2 centuries, its light slicing through the darkest nights and fiercest storms. Mariners told tales of how that light had saved countless lives, but also whispered of a shadow that clung to its walls, a darkness that swallowed souls as surely as the sea devoured ships. When I accepted the position of lighthouse keeper, I was drawn by the promise of isolation and the sea's untamed beauty. The previous keeper had vanished without a trace, leaving only his journal behind, a journal full of cryptic warnings and eerie entries that no one dared to discuss openly. My first days were filled with the mundane routines of the lighthouse, maintaining the lantern, logging weather conditions, and keeping the machinery running. Yet, beneath the routine, a subtle unease took root. On my first night, the beam flickered against the inky blackness despite the generator's steady hum. I chalked it up to the storm brewing offshore, but a gnawing feeling told me there was more. The winds howled through the cracks in the old stone walls, carrying with them faint voices, mournful, distant, and strangely human. At times I swore I could hear a woman's lullaby floating on the breeze, her voice broken and sad. One evening, while exploring the upper floors, I discovered a loose floorboard beneath the lantern room. Beneath it lay a leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed and edges frayed. It was Elias Harrow's, the last keeper. His handwriting was shaky but urgent, filled with notes about strange lights on the water and an unshakable feeling of being watched. His entries spoke of a sea wraith, a ghostly figure that haunted the cove, said to lure sailors to their deaths. Locals feared it and warned that the lighthouse's flame was the only barrier keeping it at bay. Elias believed the wraith was no mere legend, but a real and malevolent force. As days turned into weeks, I felt the weight of his warnings press down on me. The fog thickened, swallowing the horizon. Strange lights bobbed beyond the breakers, too steady to be fish, too eerie to be anything natural. Fishermen who once greeted me warmly now avoided my gaze, muttering about curses and lost souls. One old man finally spoke, eyes darting nervously. "The wraith don't just haunt the sea, lad. It watches the keepers, waits for the light to falter. When it does, the cove will bleed. That night, the storm arrived. Thunder roared and waves crashed like the world was ending. The generator sputtered, and then the light died. In the suffocating darkness, the lighthouse became a prison. Through the howling wind, I heard it, a low, mournful wail rising from the depths. Then shapes emerged from the raging sea, dark and twisting forms gliding over the water like smoke. The sea wraith was real. I raced to the lantern room, heart pounding, and lit a flare. The wraith's eyes glowed a cold blue in the flare's light, empty yet filled with rage. It moved with terrifying purpose toward the shore, toward me. I understood then that the fate of Seabridge Cove, and perhaps my own, hinged on keeping the light alive. The past keepers had failed. Would I be next? The cold flare sputtered in my trembling hand as the wraith drew nearer, its glowing eyes piercing through the storm like twin lighthouses of death. The sea churned violently beneath the spectral figure, waves clawing at the rocks, as if the ocean itself was rising in rage. My fingers fumbled desperately at the lantern's controls. The generator had failed in the storm's fury, but the backup oil reservoir was still intact. If I could light the wick before the wraith reached the shore, I might hold the darkness at bay. The lighthouse trembled with the power of the tempest as I ascended the spiral stairs, my every step a race against time and terror. Behind me, the wraith's howling cries mingled with the thunder, a mournful dirge of lost souls and broken promises. I reached the lantern room and struck a match with shaking hands. The small flame caught, flickered, and then roared to life, bathing the room in a warm golden glow. I turned the light outward, desperate for its reach to pierce the storm. Outside, the wraith recoiled, a guttural hiss escaping its unseen lips. The light seemed to wound it, forcing it back into the crashing waves. But its eyes never left me. It lingered, circling the cove like a predator denied its prey. My breath came ragged, sweat mixing with the rain on my face. I knew the stories were true. The lighthouse's light was the only barrier between the wraith and the shore, between safety and destruction. As dawn approached, the storm began to subside. The wraith vanished beneath the waves, its mournful cries fading into the morning breeze. But the price had been paid. The lighthouse's mechanisms were damaged, and the fragile light flickered uncertainly. In the days that followed, I uncovered more of Elias Harrow's journal, revealing a tragic history. Each keeper had been tested. Each had faced the wraith's wrath. Some had lost their minds. Others had vanished like whispers on the wind. The curse of Seabridge Cove was a burden carried across generations, a pact made in darkness that demanded eternal vigilance. I resolved to honor that pact. Repairing the lighthouse became my obsession, not just to protect the ships, but to keep the darkness from claiming me as it had others. At night, when the fog rolled in thick and the sea moaned its endless lament, I still hear the wraith's distant cry. I feel its gaze upon me, a reminder that the light must never fail, or the shadows will rise once more. The Seabridge Cove lighthouse stands still, a beacon of hope and warning. But beneath its steady glow lies a secret older and darker than the sea itself. Tucked away in the remote folds of an ancient valley, Eldermore lay shrouded in a persistent mist that seemed to seep from the very earth. The village was a relic of a forgotten era, cobblestone streets winding like serpents between time-worn houses, their roofs heavy with moss and shutters nailed shut against the encroaching silence. As I approached, a chill crept down my spine, an uneasy sensation that whispered warnings I could neither dismiss nor understand. Eldermore was a place frozen in time, its heartbeat stilled by shadows that clung to every corner. The air was thick with the scent of damp stone and decay, and the village square was eerily deserted even in the dying light of day. The villagers I encountered were wary and reserved, their eyes reflecting stories left untold. Conversations halted abruptly when I inquired about the village's history. Only the elder, a gaunt man named Old Tom, dared to speak openly, his voice low and trembling as he recounted the tale of the quiet hours. According to Tom, centuries ago, a devastating plague swept through Eldermore, leaving death and despair in its wake. The survivors were haunted not just by loss, but by something far darker. The dead did not rest. Bound by anguish and broken promises, the spirits rose each night, walking the streets as mournful echoes of their former lives. One evening, as twilight melted into night, I sensed a change in the atmosphere. The air grew heavy and oppressive. The usual sounds of village life faded, swallowed by an unnatural stillness. Then, from the edges of the mist, a haunting chorus began, a soft chanting, rhythmic and sorrowful, drifting through the empty streets like a mournful lament. Compelled, I stepped outside into the thickening fog. Figures emerged, translucent and pale, drifting silently like ghosts, but with a weight that pressed upon my soul. Their faces bore the weariness of forgotten years, eyes hollow and searching. Among them, I thought I glimpsed faces I had seen earlier that day, villagers who had long since passed beyond death's veil. Drawn into the heart of the procession, I followed the spectral parade to the village square, where a solitary figure awaited. A woman draped in tattered finery, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. Her voice was a fragile thread, barely rising above the whispering wind. We are the forgotten. Our stories have been silenced by time, our voices lost to the void. Will you hear us? Will you remember? In that moment, I understood that Eldermore was not just a village, but a tomb of memories, a prison of souls yearning to be heard. My journey was no longer one of escape, but of reckoning, to uncover the truths buried beneath the silence, to give voice to those the world had forsaken. The woman's sorrowful plea echoed in the heavy night air, a haunting melody that seemed to seep into my very bones. Around me, the spectral figures grew closer, their eyes filled with longing, not for vengeance, but for remembrance. The weight of their silence was unbearable, a collective grief that stretched across centuries. I knew then that the village's curse was not one of malevolence, but of forgotten voices, lives erased from memory, stories left untold. To free them, I had to become their chronicler, their witness to the world beyond the mist. Over the following days, I delved into Eldermore's forgotten history, poring over brittle manuscripts and faded records stored in the dusty village chapel. The village had been struck by calamity after calamity. Plague, war, betrayal, each leaving scars deeper than the last. I learned of families torn apart, of secrets buried beneath the soil, and of a vow made by the living to remember the dead, lest their spirits linger in unrest. As I listened to the villagers' whispered recollections, I began to piece together a tapestry of sorrow and resilience, a story that begged to be told. One night, Guided by the ghostly procession, I ventured to the ancient cemetery perched on the hill above the village. The moon cast a pale light on weathered gravestones, their inscriptions worn away by time. There, beneath the oldest oak, I found a worn stone marked only by a symbol, a hand holding a flame. As I traced the carving with trembling fingers, a sudden warmth blossomed in the cold air, and the spirits gathered close, their faces softening with hope. I spoke aloud the names and stories I had uncovered, weaving their lives back into the fabric of memory. The air shifted. A gentle breeze whispered through the trees as if the village itself was exhaling relief. From that night forward, the quiet hours began to wane. The spirits' visits grew less frequent, their forms less sorrowful. Eldermore's silence lifted, replaced by the soft murmur of life returning. The villagers, once haunted by fear, embraced their history, honoring the dead with stories, songs, and remembrance. And I, once a stranger, became the keeper of their tales, a bridge between the living and the dead. Yet, as I write this, I feel a lingering chill, a reminder that some voices never truly fade, and some stories remain suspended between shadow and light. Eldermore is no longer silent, but its echoes will forever haunt those who listen. The moment I crossed the threshold of Ravenscroft Manor, a palpable heaviness settled over me, a weight born not of dust or decay, but of secrets long buried beneath peeling wallpaper and creaking floorboards. The manor stood like a sentinel from a bygone era, its windows like dark eyes staring into the void of the surrounding overgrown woods. Dominating the grand hall was a portrait that seemed to command the space with an eerie presence. Lady Evelyn's painted gaze bore into me with unsettling clarity, her eyes shimmering with a life that defied centuries of stillness. Local villagers spoke in hushed tones of the lady in the mirror, a figure entwined with curses and tragedy that had haunted the manor for generations. I had inherited Ravenscroft unexpectedly, a distant relative's bequest arriving like a whisper on the wind. Alone in this sprawling estate, I felt both custodian and prisoner, drawn irresistibly toward the portrait that watched me like a sentry, guarding forbidden truths. Nightfall brought with it a creeping dread. Mirrors throughout the manor refused to reflect my image properly, instead showing shadows that flickered and twisted just beyond the edge of perception. At times, when the house fell silent, I heard soft murmurs, voices trapped between worlds, weaving stories I was only beginning to understand. One storm-lashed evening, the manor's power flickered and died, plunging me into darkness. Candlelight cast long dancing shadows, and I found myself standing before Lady Evelyn's portrait. The eyes, impossibly vivid, seemed to glisten with unshed tears. A whisper, like silk brushing skin, echoed through the room, calling my name in a voice both distant and achingly close. The air chilled, wrapping me in its icy embrace as a shiver traced my spine. I reached out hesitantly, my fingers trembling as they hovered over the canvas. A sudden ripple shimmered across the glass frame, as if the portrait were a pool disturbed by unseen hands. Driven by a need to understand, I scoured the manor's dusty archives and brittle journals. Lady Evelyn's story emerged from the shadows. A woman condemned by superstition and fear, imprisoned in secret chambers beneath the manor for crimes never proven. Her final days were spent in solitude and despair, her spirit bound eternally to the portrait that captured her anguish. Whispers warned that the portrait was more than paint and canvas. It was a gateway to a realm where time fractured, and the lost lingered in endless twilight. To gaze too long into Lady Evelyn's eyes was to risk being drawn into that realm, a liminal space between life and death, memory and oblivion. That night, as lightning cracked across the sky and rain battered the ancient stone, the mirror beside the portrait rippled like disturbed water. I felt a force tugging at my very soul, the manor's walls dissolving into shifting shadows and fractured light. The world blurred, and I stood at the edge of the unknown, a place where forgotten spirits waited and the past bled into the present. The moment the manor dissolved into shadow and light, I found myself standing within a realm unlike any I had known, a place suspended between reality and nightmare. The walls here were woven from mist and memories, shifting endlessly as if the manor itself had become a living dream. Lady Evelyn stood before me, her eyes no longer painted, but burning with a fierce, spectral glow.
"You have come,"
she whispered, voice echoing like the rustle of ancient silk. "Few have dared to enter. Fewer still have returned." As I followed her through the labyrinthine corridors of this ghostly reflection, the air grew heavy with sorrow and regret. Each step echoed with the cries of those trapped in this liminal space, souls ensnared by fear, betrayal, and unfinished stories. Evelyn's tale unfolded. Accused of witchcraft by those who coveted her lands and power, she was imprisoned and left to die alone beneath the manor. Her spirit, bound to the portrait, had lingered in this twilight realm, desperate for freedom. But the curse was not hers alone. Others had been drawn into the painting's eternal grasp, lovers, rivals, innocents, all caught in the web of fear and vengeance spun centuries ago. I realized then that to escape, I must unravel the truth behind the curse, to set right the wrongs that had bound these souls. Only by acknowledging their stories, by facing the shadows of the past, could the portal between worlds be closed. Guided by Evelyn, I uncovered hidden chambers and forgotten journals that told of betrayal, love, and sacrifice. Each revelation peeled back layers of darkness, revealing the humanity trapped within the spectral forms. Yet, as the dawn approached, the painting's power grew stronger, its pull irresistible. The manor's walls began to close in, threatening to trap me forever in this realm of shadows. In a final act of courage, I faced the portrait, speaking aloud the truths I had uncovered. The spectral figures around me wavered, their faces softening, freed from centuries of torment. With a brilliant flash, the realm fractured, and I was cast back into the manor's grand hall. The portrait hung silent, its eyes now gentle, the curse lifted, for now. But the manor still whispered, and deep within its walls, the shadows wait. Some stories never end, and some reflections never fade. Black Hollow Forest had a reputation that curled around the small town of Ravensbrook like the ever-present mist, thick, chilling, and impossible to ignore. The forest was ancient, its gnarled trees towering like sentinels over a ground carpeted with fallen leaves and shadow. Local legends told of a darkness that dwelled within, a curse that had settled like a permanent shroud since time immemorial. No one ventured into Black Hollow after nightfall. Those who did either vanished or returned broken, eyes glazed and voices lost to the chilling silence. Stories whispered of voices carried on the thick fog, luring wanderers deeper into the labyrinth of trees, never to be seen again. I arrived in Ravensbrook at dusk, the sky bruised purple and orange, clutching my brother's worn jacket tightly. Months had passed since his disappearance in Black Hollow, and the local sheriff's investigation had yielded nothing. I was met with wary glances and guarded silence. The townsfolk seemed reluctant to speak of the forest or the curse. But desperation outweighed fear. I was resolved to uncover the truth, to find whatever fragment of my brother's fate remained hidden in the misted depths of Black Hollow. The first night I entered the forest alone, my lantern casting trembling shadows on twisted roots and tangled underbrush. The air was thick with moisture and the scent of decayed earth. Fog crept between the trees, swallowing my footsteps and dulling sound until the world became a muted dream. A sudden rustling nearby made me freeze, but nothing emerged except a lone owl, its eyes reflecting faintly in the lantern's glow. Yet, beneath the stillness, I felt it. A presence watching, waiting. Then came the whispers, soft and indistinct, like the susurrus of wind through dry leaves, but unmistakably voices. They slipped past my mind's defenses, faint cries of longing and despair, fragments of names and half-remembered pleas. As I moved deeper, the whispers grew louder and more coherent, threading through the fog with a cruel promise of safety and salvation. They called to me by name, spoke of hidden paths and buried truths, coaxing me onward despite the growing chill in my bones. The forest seemed to pulse with life, or perhaps with something far older and darker. Shadows shifted and stretched just beyond sight, flickering in peripheral vision and vanishing when faced directly. On the second night, the fog was thicker, almost tangible, curling around my legs and dampening the sounds of the forest. The path I followed dissolved into undergrowth, forcing me to press onward blindly. Then, through the mist, I stumbled upon an ancient stone altar, worn smooth by centuries of rain and time. Strange carvings encircled its base, symbols unfamiliar but suffused with a power that resonated deep within my soul. The air hummed with an unnatural energy, vibrating like a heartbeat in the stillness. I hesitated, sensing eyes upon me, unseen but unyielding. Reaching out to touch the altar's cold surface, I was interrupted by a whisper, clear as a bell, yet cold as the grave. "You should not be here." From the swirling fog stepped a figure, pale and ethereal, her presence both haunting and mesmerizing. Her eyes glowed faintly, like dying embers struggling against the night. She introduced herself as the guardian of Black Hollow, a spirit bound to the forest by a curse born of betrayal and bloodshed centuries before. The whispers were not mere echoes of the wind, but the voices of trapped souls, victims of a sacrifice that condemned them to eternal twilight. Understanding dawned with a weight that crushed my chest. The only hope of saving my brother and myself was to break the ancient curse by confronting the darkness at its heart. But the deeper I ventured, the more I realized some shadows were stitched into the fabric of the world, never meant to be unraveled. The spectral woman's eyes bore into mine, filled with a sorrow that transcended time. To break the curse, you must face the heart of the forest, where darkness was born, and sacrifice sealed the fate of all who dwell here. She led me deeper into the woods, the fog thickening like a living entity. The trees seemed to close in, their twisted branches clawing at the sky, blotting out the moon. Every step echoed with whispers, mournful, desperate, pleading. We reached a clearing where an ancient stone circle stood, cracked and overgrown, yet radiating a palpable energy. In its center, a weathered altar bore the stains of blood long dried. Here, the betrayal had been born, a pact made in shadows, a soul condemned for power. The Guardian revealed the tale. Centuries ago, a woman named Maris had been accused of witchcraft, betrayed by those she trusted most. In a desperate bid for survival, she had cursed the forest and bound her spirit to it, dooming all who entered to join her eternal torment. As the first light of dawn pierced the canopy, I felt the forest's grip tighten. The whispers rose to a deafening chorus, shadows stretching toward me like grasping hands. I realized the curse sought to claim me, to trap my soul alongside the lost. Summoning every ounce of will, I spoke the Guardian's words, a plea for release, an acknowledgement of the pain and betrayal that fueled the curse. The ground trembled, the shadows recoiled, and the fog began to lift. The spirits, once restless, now gathered peacefully, their faces softened by gratitude. The forest exhaled, the oppressive weight lifting with the rising sun. The Guardian's form faded, a gentle smile lingering as she whispered, "You have freed us all." But as I turned to leave, I caught a fleeting glimpse of my brother's figure in the distance, fading like mist. The curse was broken, but some souls remained, waiting, watching, whispering. Back in Ravensbrook, the townsfolk noticed the change. Black Hollow's oppressive silence was replaced by a gentle rustling, a whisper of wind through trees no longer haunted. Yet the memory lingered, a reminder that some darkness never fully dies and some whispers never cease. Blackwatch Lighthouse stood alone on the jagged cliffs overlooking the restless sea, a silent guardian against the encroaching darkness of both night and time. Once, its brilliant beam had cut through the thickest storms, guiding countless sailors safely home. Now its glass was cracked, its walls weathered by salt and neglect, and the light had long since died. The nearby fishing village regarded the lighthouse with a mix of fear and sorrow. Tales whispered over ale spoke of a terrible tragedy that had befallen the last keeper, Thomas Gray. And how, since his disappearance, the lighthouse was cursed, a beacon not for safety, but for despair. I arrived at Blackwatch just as twilight was bleeding into night, the sky smeared with bruised clouds. The wind howled through the broken panes, carrying the scent of the cold sea and something older, the heavy breath of forgotten grief. Stepping inside, the air was thick with dust and the lingering scent of damp wood and seaweed. The spiral staircase groaned beneath my weight as I ascended toward the lantern room. Each step echoed through the empty tower like a heartbeat in a void. Near the base, tucked beneath rotting floorboards, I found a battered leather-bound diary, Thomas Gray's journal. Its pages were yellowed, edges curled and stained, but the words burned with raw emotion. His entries spoke of duty and devotion, but also of mounting despair after his wife Eliza was lost to a violent storm at sea. Desperate to save her, he had kept the light burning through every tempest, only to watch the waves claim her and his hope. As his sorrow deepened, so did the darkness that seemed to creep into the lighthouse itself, until the light finally faltered and died. His last entry was a plea, a hope that someone would come and rekindle the beacon, freeing both the lost souls and his own restless spirit. That night, as the fog rolled in thick and heavy, I stood in the lantern room, the ancient Fresnel lens looming before me, cracked and clouded, yet still magnificent. The wind's mournful wails rose from the cliffs below, and through the mist, flickering shapes appeared, ghostly figures of sailors, their faces etched with fear and longing. A sudden chill wrapped around me as a translucent figure emerged. Thomas Gray himself, eyes hollow yet filled with a desperate resolve. "The light must shine again," he whispered, voice barely more than the rustle of sea foam against stone. "Only then will the souls be free." The weight of Thomas Gray's ghost pressed down on me, a burden that felt almost tangible in the cold lantern room. His hollow eyes locked onto mine, brimming with centuries of sorrow and a desperate plea. "You must help me," he urged softly, his voice like the whisper of waves crashing against craggy rocks below. "Bring back the light. Only then will the souls be freed from this endless torment." I nodded, though uncertainty gnawed at my heart. Restoring the lighthouse was no small task, its mechanisms corroded by time, abandoned to rust and salt. Yet I knew this was my only chance to save my brother, and perhaps myself. For days I scoured the tower, uncovering fragments of old maintenance logs and Thomas's meticulous journal entries hidden beneath loose floorboards. The journal detailed the process to rekindle the flame, describing the delicate balance of oil, the careful polishing of the Fresnel lens, and the timing needed to ignite the great beacon. The machinery groaned under my hands, cogs seized tight with rust, wheels cracked and brittle. I worked feverishly, scraping away layers of salt-crusted grime, patching together broken gears and salvaging what oil I could find in forgotten containers. Each night the lighthouse moaned like a wounded beast, but the fire inside it was slowly stoked back to life. As the nights passed, the ghostly sailors began to gather. They appeared as misty figures pressed against the windows, their hollow faces etched with fear, regret, and hope. Their eyes sought the beacon, the promise of salvation, and I could feel their silent prayers vibrating in the salty air. One stormy night, lightning split the sky, and the wind tore through the cliffs with the rage of 1,000 lost souls. Clutching a heavy lantern, I ascended the winding staircase to the lantern room, heart pounding as I prepared to ignite the flame. With trembling fingers, I poured the oil, struck the flint, and watched as a small spark flickered to life. The great Fresnel lens caught the flame, refracting it into a brilliant beam that shattered the dense fog. The sound that followed was not of thunder or wind, but a chorus of ethereal sighs, the ghosts of the lost finally released from their torment. I watched as the sailors' forms shimmered, then slowly dissolved into the morning mist, their faces softened by peace. But the battle was not yet won. From the depths of the dark sea below, a monstrous shadow rose, a spectral leviathan wreathed in churning waves and storm clouds. Bound to the cursed waters by the same sorrow that had claimed Eliza, the beast's roar shook the cliffs, its eyes glowing with an ancient fury. It thrashed, threatening to drown the lighthouse and all who dared to defy its wrath. Thomas's spirit stood resolute beside me, his form steady despite the howling gale. "The light is our shield," he said, voice strong with conviction. "It is hope, and it will protect us." With a roar of my own, I focused on the beacon, willing the flame to burn brighter. The brilliant beam cut through the storm, striking the Leviathan's spectral form. The creature writhed, its thunderous howls fading into agonized whispers as it sank back beneath the waves, its curse weakened by the power of the light. As dawn broke, the fog lifted, unveiling a tranquil sea and a sky painted in soft hues of gold and rose. The lighthouse stood tall and proud once more, its light slicing through the morning mist like a promise reborn. Thomas's spirit smiled, a profound relief softening his once tormented features.
Thank you.
He whispered, fading slowly into the warm embrace of the rising sun. Returning to the village, I found the fishermen gathered at the docks, eyes wide with wonder at the renewed beacon. The curse that had gripped Blackwatch was lifted, the shadow of despair replaced by a fragile but enduring hope. The lighthouse was no longer a symbol of loss, but a beacon of redemption. And while the sea would always hold its mysteries, now, beneath the steady light, even the darkest storms could be faced with courage. The Ashcroft Asylum had been abandoned for over 50 years, a sprawling labyrinth of crumbling stone and rusted iron nestled on the outskirts of the town. Its towering walls, once meant to protect, had become a prison for memories. Echoes of anguish, despair, and secrets long buried beneath peeling paint and shattered windows. Locals whispered that the asylum was haunted, the restless spirits of patients trapped in the shadows of its halls, their cries still echoing through the empty corridors. Few dared to enter after dusk, and those who did often returned, changed, haunted themselves by what they had seen. Drawn by a restless curiosity and the need to confront my own past, I ventured inside the asylum's decaying gates just as twilight bled into night. The air was thick with dust and the scent of mildew, broken only by the distant drip of water and the faintest whispers carried on the cold breeze. Inside, the walls seemed to breathe. The peeling wallpaper rustled as if stirred by unseen hands. Footsteps echoed behind me, though when I turned, only empty hallways stretched into darkness. The flicker of my flashlight cast long shadows that danced eerily along the cracked tiles. As I explored deeper, I found remnants of lives left suspended in time. Rusted wheelchairs, faded patient records, and torn photographs pinned to walls like ghostly reminders. The stories of those who had lived and suffered here were etched into every surface, a tapestry of forgotten souls longing for release. In the heart of the asylum, I discovered the old treatment wing, rooms lined with iron beds and shattered glass. A coldness seeped into my bones as I heard a soft, sorrowful lullaby drifting through the air, weaving between broken pipes and shattered ceilings. Suddenly, a voice, faint, pleading, whispered my name. It was a woman's voice, trembling and desperate. I followed the sound to a locked room at the end of a long corridor where the rusted door creaked open with a push I didn't recall making. Inside, a faded portrait hung crooked on the wall, the likeness of a young woman whose eyes seemed to follow me with silent accusation. Beneath it, a diary lay open, its pages yellowed but filled with anguish and hope. The diary belonged to Eleanor Hayes, a patient forgotten by time. Her words told of mistreatment, loneliness, and a desperate hope for freedom. She spoke of a secret hidden within the asylum, a hidden room where the darkest truths were concealed and where the souls of the forgotten still lingered. As I closed the diary, the air grew thick, and the whispers swelled into a chorus of voices calling me deeper into the asylum's shadows. To find the hidden room was to confront the echoes of the past, and to face the darkness that still clung to Ashcroft's walls. The voices swirled around me, a chorus of sorrow and warning as I clutched Eleanor's diary to my chest. The fading light of my flashlight flickered against the peeling walls, casting grotesque shadows that seemed to pulse with life. The air grew colder, heavier, as if the asylum itself was drawing breath, waiting for me to uncover its darkest secret. I followed the faint whispers down winding corridors and spiral staircases, guided by an unseen force. The floorboards groaned beneath my feet, and every creak echoed like a scream in the oppressive silence. At last, I came upon a heavy steel door, rusted but sealed shut, with a lock that looked decades old. Summoning every ounce of courage, I forced the door open. Inside lay a chamber, small, windowless, and stained with the passage of time. The walls were scratched with frantic markings, cryptic symbols, and desperate pleas for mercy. In the center of the room was an old, broken wheelchair, its leather straps frayed and worn. Nearby, scattered papers revealed horrific records of treatments that defied humanity. Electric shocks administered without consent, ice baths that froze patients to the bone, and whispers of experimental drugs used to silence the screaming minds trapped within these walls. The ghosts of those tormented souls seemed to pulse in the darkness, their voices rising in anguish and rage. I felt their pain as if it was my own, a heavy weight pressing down on my heart. Suddenly, a cold gust slammed the door shut behind me. Panic surged, but then a soft voice, Eleanor's, whispered, "You must remember. You must tell." The room around me shimmered, and I was transported to a vision of the past. I saw Eleanor, frail but defiant, standing against the cruelty of those who sought to erase her existence. I saw the secret kept hidden, a ritual of silence and fear meant to bind the souls to Ashcroft forever. Breaking free from the vision, I realized that the asylum was not just a prison for the lost. It was a tomb for the truth. Only by shining a light on the horrors within could the echoes behind the walls be silenced. With renewed purpose, I vowed to bring Eleanor's story to the world, to expose the darkness that had festered in Ashcroft's halls, and to free the voices trapped in the shadows once and for all. As I left the hidden chamber, the whispers softened. No longer cries of despair, but murmurs of gratitude. The asylum, heavy with centuries of pain, seemed to breathe easier. Yet, in the distance, the faintest echo remained, a reminder that some echoes never truly fade. The iron bridge that loomed over Millhaven River was more than a century old, its rusting beams twisted and corroded, worn by endless storms and the passage of time. To the townsfolk, it was a monument of sorrow, a place whispered about in hushed tones and avoided after dark. Stories spoke of a shadow that haunted its underbelly, a restless spirit trapped in the murky depths below. I arrived on a bleak autumn evening, the sky heavy with low-hanging clouds and a biting chill that seemed to seep into my bones. The mist curled like smoke over the river's surface, blurring the line between water and sky. As I stepped onto the bridge, the metal groaned beneath my boots, a mournful sound that echoed through the fog and unsettled my every nerve. The river roared beneath me, its black waters swirling in unpredictable currents, swallowing the fading light of the day. I paused, letting the silence press in, broken only by distant calls of night birds and the soft rustling of dead leaves. Venturing beneath the bridge, I found the banks cluttered with debris, discarded bottles, broken wood, and remnants of lives once lived. A faint glow flickered at the water's edge, shifting like a will-o'-the-wisp. As I moved closer, a sudden cold breeze swept past, carrying with it a whisper, low, guttural, almost unintelligible, that sent a shiver racing down my spine. Then, emerging from the fog, the figure took form. Tall and slender, its outline wavering like smoke caught in the wind. Its eyes burned with a spectral light, cold and sorrowful, watching me with an intensity that rooted me in place. The air around it shimmered, and the shadow moved with a fluid grace that no human could match. I tried to speak, my voice trembling, but the words caught in my throat. Instead, the figure spoke, its voice a haunting melody of despair and fury. "I am Lila," it whispered, "betrayed, drowned, forgotten." The shadow's tale unfolded. A wedding night turned nightmare when the bridge's aged supports collapsed beneath the weight of celebration and grief. Lila had plunged into the icy river, her cries lost beneath the roaring current. Since that night, her spirit was bound to the river and the bridge, trapped between worlds, seeking justice for the betrayal that stole her life. As the darkness deepened around us, I felt the crushing weight of her sorrow settle on my chest, a pain so raw it threatened to overwhelm me. The shadow's mournful gaze pierced through me, a silent plea for release. To free Lila, I would need to unravel the secrets hidden beneath rusted steel and silenced tongues, to confront the town's buried guilt and the darkness festering beneath the surface. The river's relentless murmur seemed to swell as I stood beneath the iron arches, the ghostly presence of Lila ever more vivid against the swirling fog. Her eyes, gleaming like distant stars, bore into mine with a mixture of sorrow and unyielding resolve. "The truth lies buried beneath the wreckage," she whispered. "Beneath the twisted steel and shattered lives, the betrayal festers still. Find the remains. Bring the truth to light." Guided by her spectral hand, I descended along the treacherous riverbank, the mud slick beneath my boots, the water clawing at the earth. Fragments of the bridge's collapse lay scattered, warped beams, shattered wood, and twisted cables submerged in the cold depths. The deeper I ventured, the colder the air became, and the cries of unseen things echoed faintly in the distance. A glint caught my eye beneath the murky water, a fragment of fabric caught on a jagged piece of metal. I waded in, fingers numb, and pulled free a waterlogged locket engraved with delicate initials, LH. Suddenly the ground trembled. A distant, anguished roar rose from the river as shadows writhed beneath the surface. The spectral leviathan, a dark sentinel bound by the same curse, stirred in restless fury. Its enormous form surged upward, eyes blazing with ancient rage as it lunged toward the shore. Frozen by fear, I felt the weight of Lila's presence beside me, steadying me. The curse can only be broken by unveiling the truth, by confronting those who abandoned me to die. I raced against the swelling tide, clutching the locket, searching for the town's forgotten archives, where records of the tragedy might still lie hidden. The townsfolk had long buried the past, silencing witnesses and concealing guilt beneath polite smiles and forgotten names. In the dim light of the dusty archives, I uncovered an unsigned letter, a damning confession implicating a powerful family who had knowingly neglected the bridge's failing structure, sacrificing lives for profit. Returning to the bridge at midnight, I held the locket aloft, calling out to Lila's spirit and the restless souls entwined in her curse. As the first light of dawn painted the horizon, the spectral leviathan roared once more, then vanished beneath the waves. The fog lifted, and a profound stillness settled over the river. Lila's figure smiled softly before fading into the morning mist, finally free. Millhaven would forever bear the scars of its sins, but the shadow beneath the bridge was lifted. The river sang a new song, one of mourning, justice, and finally peace. Raven's Hollow was a town wrapped in mist and secrets, its streets lined with ancient trees whose twisted branches clawed at the sky. At the far end of Willow Lane stood the Hawthorne House, a crooked Victorian mansion that seemed to lean under the weight of its own dark history. It was a place the townsfolk spoke of only in whispers, warning children never to stray near its shadowed walls. The source of its dread was the mirror, an ornate, silver-framed glass said to hold the souls of those who dared to meet their own gaze within it. Legends spoke of a curse older than the house itself, one that twisted reflections into traps for the living. One cold October evening, the wind howled through the empty streets as I approached the mansion's creaking gate. My breath frosted in the air, mingling with the scent of damp leaves and decay. The porch steps groaned beneath my hesitant footsteps as I pushed open the heavy oak door. Inside, the air was thick with dust and something metallic, a faint copper tang that prickled my senses like a warning. Moonlight spilled through the grimy windows, illuminating the faded wallpaper peeling from the walls like dying skin. In the parlor, beneath a cracked chandelier, hung the mirror. Its surface shimmered unnaturally, seeming to ripple and pulse like the surface of a dark lake. The frame was carved with writhing vines, faces frozen in eternal anguish, their mouths open in silent screams. I stepped closer, drawn as if by a force beyond reason. My reflection appeared, but it was wrong. Too still, too dark. Its eyes held a depth I did not recognize, a hunger lurking beneath the surface. When I raised my hand, the reflection hesitated, then mimicked my movement with a delay, as if testing me. Suddenly, the air shifted. The room around me blurred, colors drained away, and a cold void opened at my feet. Before I could react, I was pulled forward, falling into the mirror's depths. I landed in a world of shattered reflections and fractured light, endless corridors lined with mirrors that reflected impossible angles. Each step echoed with the whispers of countless voices, some pleading, others warning, all trapped within this mirrored prison. My own reflection appeared beside me, but it was twisted, a dark doppelganger with eyes void of empathy and a smile too wide. It spoke without moving its lips, a voice inside my head. You have seen beyond the veil. Now you belong to me. Around us, shadows flickered and moved, trapped souls twisted into grotesque forms, reaching out with translucent hands. The curse fed on fear and memory, drawing strength from the despair of its victims. I realized then that to escape, I must confront this reflection, face my darkest fears, and break the ancient curse that bound us all within this endless labyrinth of glass. The moment I recognized the reflection's sinister grin, a cold dread seeped into my bones. The mirrored world around me shifted, walls bending and twisting, as if the very fabric of this place was alive, responsive to the dark will of the reflection. You cannot escape, it whispered, voice like shattered glass. Here, you are mine. I forced myself to steady my breath, heart hammering in my chest. If I surrendered to fear, I would be trapped forever. Gathering every ounce of resolve, I stepped forward to face the reflection. The doppelganger mirrored my movements perfectly, except with cruel exaggeration. When I raised my hand, its fingers curled into claws. When I blinked, its eyes flared with malevolent fire. It was a twisted echo, the embodiment of my darkest fears and regrets. The corridors of mirrors around us shattered, splintering into shards that floated like shards of ice. From the fractured glass emerged ghostly figures, faces of those lost to the mirror's curse, frozen in torment and begging for release. One reached out to me, lips mouthing words I could not hear. Another's eyes held a silent plea. I realized these souls were fragments of lives stolen, trapped between reflections and reality. Desperation fueled my fight. I lunged at the reflection, but my hands passed through it like mist. It retaliated with a chilling touch that sent icy fire coursing through my veins, threatening to erase my very essence. But then a whisper echoed in my mind, a memory of light and hope. I recalled Eleanor's diary, the courage it inspired. This place fed on fear. Only light could fracture its grip. Summoning every flicker of hope, I imagined a brilliant flame burning within me. The mirrored walls blazed with radiant light, shattering the shadows and sending shards flying in every direction. The reflection screamed, a soundless howl that vibrated through the air. Slowly, the doppelganger began to dissolve, its form breaking apart into shimmering particles that scattered into the ether. As the last fragment vanished, the labyrinth of mirrors faded away, and I found myself back in the parlor of the Hawthorne house. The cursed mirror hung silent and still, its surface dark and empty, as if waiting for the next victim. I stumbled away, breathless but free. The whispers had ceased. The trapped souls were released. And the curse was broken. Yet, as I reached the front door, a faint shimmer caught my eye. The mirror's surface rippled once more. A whisper echoed faintly behind me. Until we meet again. The Crestwood bus terminal was a relic from another era, a crumbling structure of peeling paint and broken benches, swallowed by shadows under a crescent moon. It was the sort of place where time seemed to stand still and where the air hung heavy with forgotten stories and unspoken fears. I arrived just as the clock struck midnight, clutching a ticket that felt heavier than it should. The silence around me was profound, broken only by the distant howl of wind weaving through rusted street signs and the soft, uneven drip of water leaking from the terminal roof. The bus pulled up with a screech of brakes, its rusted frame groaning as the door hissed open. The driver sat behind the wheel, a pale figure with hollow eyes that seemed to pierce the darkness. He didn't speak, only gestured for me to board with a crooked smile that stretched unnaturally wide. Inside, the bus smelled of stale smoke and old leather, the seats torn and stained with the passage of countless unknown travelers. Flickering fluorescent lights overhead cast a sickly glow, illuminating the faces of the few passengers already aboard. They were strange, silent figures, cloaked in shadows. Their eyes were hollow, their faces obscured by hoods or the dim light. They did not speak, did not move, except to watch me with an intensity that sent chills down my spine. As the bus rumbled away from the terminal, the town of Crestwood vanished behind us, swallowed by a creeping fog that clung to the road like a living thing. The world outside the windows twisted and blurred, transforming into an endless night where stars flickered and died. The bus traveled down roads that defied logic, twisting impossibly, looping back on themselves like the coils of a serpent. Signs appeared and disappeared, towns with names that twisted my tongue, places that should not exist. Time fractured. The clock above the driver's seat spun wildly, its hands moving backward and forward in maddening chaos. The passengers remained silent, their empty eyes reflecting an abyss. Whispers rose from their lips, words in forgotten languages that crawled under my skin and seeped into my dreams. I realized then that this was no ordinary bus. It was a vessel for lost souls, a journey through the liminal spaces between life and death, reality and nightmare. The driver, with his unsettling smile, was a guide to nowhere, ferrying us through shadows that promised no escape. I was the last passenger, the final soul to board this eternal voyage into darkness. The bus groaned as it plunged deeper into the endless night, the fog thickening until the world outside the windows vanished entirely. The only light was the flickering glow of the overhead lamps, casting eerie shadows that danced like restless spirits across the cabin. I glanced nervously at the other passengers. Their hollow eyes now seemed to glow faintly, reflecting a cold, otherworldly light. They murmured in tongues I couldn't understand, their voices weaving a chilling lullaby that seeped into my mind, threatening to unravel my sanity. The driver's face remained expressionless, his eyes fixed ahead, as if watching a path no living soul could see. I tried to speak, to ask where we were headed, but the words caught in my throat. The bus felt less like a vehicle and more like a coffin, carrying me to an unknown fate from which there was no return. Suddenly, the bus jolted violently. The windows shattered inward, replaced instantly by thick darkness, pressing in like a suffocating void. The whispers grew louder, overlapping in a cacophony of despair and rage. Shadows flickered along the aisles, reaching with grasping hands. Panic surged through me as I realized the passengers were no longer human, their forms twisting and warping into grotesque shapes, faces melting into monstrous masks of agony. One reached out, fingers elongated and tipped with claws, brushing my shoulder with a cold that burned like ice. I recoiled, stumbling into the aisle as the bus hurtled through a tunnel of shadows, twisting and distorting reality. Memories I had buried deep surfaced unbidden. Faces lost, regrets unspoken, the sting of mistakes that could never be undone. In that moment, the driver turned slowly toward me. His eyes glowed bright red, and his smile widened into a grotesque grin. "Welcome to the final journey," he hissed, voice dripping with malice. "Here, you pay the toll for your sins." Desperately, I searched for a way out, but the doors were sealed tight, the windows nothing but black mirrors reflecting my growing terror. The bus was no longer bound by roads or time. It hurtled through an endless abyss where hope withered and fear reigned. Summoning every shred of courage, I faced the driver. "What do you want from me?" I demanded, voice trembling but fierce. He leaned closer, the stench of decay filling my nostrils. "Your soul," he whispered, "to join the lost, to become part of the endless ride." But I was not ready to surrender. Clutching the ticket tightly, I recalled the words of an old stranger. Only those who confront their darkest fears can escape the ride into darkness. With trembling hands, I tore the ticket in two. A blinding light exploded in the cabin, shattering the shadows and silencing the whispers. The bus screeched to a halt, the world snapping back into focus. The doors swung open, revealing the familiar dawn of a new day. The passengers were gone. The driver vanished without a trace. I stepped off the bus, breathless but alive, carrying the weight of a journey that had changed me forever. Crestwood lay silent behind me, its secrets hidden once more beneath the veil of mist. But the memory lingered, a warning that some rides never truly end, and some passengers are never truly free.